What if the person stalking you knew your every move, even before you did? Imagine being watched by someone you trust. Stick around to find out who's lurking in Sarah's shadows. Happy Halloween. Chapter 1. A Night of Joy and Frights. It was Halloween evening in Las Vegas, a city where every night felt like a masquerade of sorts. The cityscape was more animated than usual, and the neighborhoods were alive with children in costumes, adults sipping themed cocktails, and houses draped in spiderwebs and skeletons. Sarah, a 22-year-old college student, was babysitting Jason and Emily, siblings aged 10 and 8. She had been their go-to babysitter for nearly 2 years, watching them grow from timid kids to bubbly preteens. This year, Halloween fell on a weekend, making it even more exciting for the kids and, unfortunately, for those with darker intentions. The local news had been abuzz with reminders of the notorious Halloween murderer, an unidentified person who committed heinous crimes every Halloween for the past 3 years. Police ramped up their efforts with increased patrols and encouraged parents and guardians to accompany children while trick or treating. Sarah had been hesitant to take the kids out, but didn't want to disappoint them. To compromise, she mapped out a short, well-populated route that would keep them close to home and within the boundaries of the gated community they lived in. "We're going to have the best Halloween ever, Sarah. Mom and Dad even got us the costumes we wanted," Emily chirped, her face glowing under her fairy princess makeup. Jason, ever the adventurer, was dressed as a pirate, complete with a cardboard sword. "Aw, we be plundering lots o' candies tonight." Sarah chuckled at their enthusiasm. She was dressed as a superhero, a costume she'd picked out last minute, but one that the kids approved of. Before setting off, Sarah did a final check mobile phones fully charged. A small flashlight and a can of pepper spray discreetly tucked into her bag. She looked at the excited faces of Jason and Emily and pushed aside her reservations. Tonight was about making wonderful memories for them, and she was determined to do just that. They stepped out into the cooler desert air, their spirits high. The streets were full of Halloween revelers, kids dashing from door to door, parents in tow, and some homes going all out with their decorations, turning their front yards into haunted houses. Sarah followed her planned route diligently, and everything was going as well as one could hope. They were halfway through when Sarah felt her phone vibrate. It was a text message. "Happy Halloween, Sarah." She didn't recognize the number and assumed it was a misplaced text. Shrugging it off, they moved to the next house, where a young couple was distributing king-sized candy bars. Just as Jason and Emily rushed towards their next treasure, Sarah noticed a figure standing across the street. Clad in a Grim Reaper costume, the figure stood ominously still, its gaze fixed on them. A chill ran down her spine. Chapter 2. Disquieting Moments. Sarah quickly snapped back to reality as she heard Emily's joyous laughter. The little girl was proudly showing off the king-sized candy bar she had just received. Jason was already negotiating with her to trade it for some of his smaller treats. For a fleeting moment, Sarah debated whether to immediately head home, but seeing the pure joy in Jason and Emily's faces, she hesitated. She didn't want to alarm them, nor did she want to ruin their Halloween night over what could simply be an innocent bystander, enjoying the holiday spirit in a Grim Reaper costume. "Okay, 2 more houses, and then we go back. Deal?" Sarah proposed, trying to keep her voice steady. "Deal," Jason and Emily agreed, thrilled at the prospect of more candy. As they approached the next house, Sarah couldn't help but glance back. To her relief, the Grim Reaper figure was gone. Perhaps it had been her imagination, fueled by the spooky atmosphere of Halloween and the disturbing text message she had received. But then her phone buzzed again. Don't you want to play a game, Sarah? The unknown number again. Her heart pounded in her chest as she deliberated her next move. This was no random message. Someone was watching her, following her, and that made the decision for her. Change of plans, kiddos. Let's head to the park for a bit. How does that sound? Sarah's voice quivered slightly as she spoke, hoping the kids wouldn't notice. Awesome, Emily exclaimed, always excited for a trip to the park. Yeah, I guess that could be fun, Jason added, attempting to play it cool. Sarah felt a surge of guilt for not being entirely honest with them, but their safety was her priority. Park was well lit and usually populated, even at night, especially on Halloween. She reasoned it would be a safer option until she could figure out what to do next. As they made their way to the park, Sarah took the opportunity to text the children's parents about their slight change in plans. She didn't mention the creepy texts or the figure she'd seen. No point in worrying them unnecessarily when they were out enjoying their anniversary dinner. The park was buzzing with activity. Families and friends were gathered around, some in costumes, some not. There was a sense of community in the air, and for a moment, Sarah felt a bit more at ease. But just as they found an empty bench and started going through their candy, Sarah felt her phone vibrate yet again. Nice change of scenery. See you next Halloween. Her heart sank. She scanned the crowd frantically, searching for any sign of the Grim Reaper. But he was nowhere to be found. And that's when she decided enough was enough. It was time to go home.
Hey everyone, if you're enjoying these spine-chilling stories, do me a favor. Hit that like button and smash subscribe. It helps to keep the horrors coming your way. Don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss a scare. Thanks for watching.
Chapter 3, Return and Revelations. The walk back home felt much longer than Sarah had remembered. Every sound, every footstep echoing in the distance seemed to intensify her fear. Jason and Emily, who had started to sense the tension, remained unusually quiet. When they finally arrived home, Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. The familiar surroundings of the house offered a sanctuary, albeit a temporary one. She quickly locked the door behind them. Okay, kids, why don't you both sort through your candies in the living room? Maybe even start some of your candy trades, Sarah suggested, trying to keep the atmosphere light. As Jason and Emily made themselves comfortable on the living room rug, their young faces illuminated by the glow of a jack-o'-lantern, Sarah retreated to the kitchen. She needed a moment to think, to process the events of the evening. She pulled out her phone and hesitated. Should she call the police? What would she even tell them? That she received a couple of text messages and saw someone in a Halloween costume in a city where bizarre outfits were the norm? It wouldn't be enough. Instead, she decided to send a text to Jennifer and Mark, Jason and Emily's parents. Hey, we're back home. Kids had fun, but some strange things happened. We'll fill you in when you get back. Please, hurry. As she put down her phone, she heard Emily's voice from the living room, tinged with curiosity. Sarah, was that outside the window? A jolt of fear shot through her. She rushed to the living room and saw Emily pointing at the window. Her eyes followed the direction of Emily's finger, half expecting to see the Grim Reaper figure staring back at her. But there was no one. You probably saw a passerby, or maybe it was just a shadow, Sarah said, not quite convinced of her own explanation. But it looked like he was wearing a hood, like the Grim Reaper, Emily insisted. Jason chimed in. Maybe it was just someone from the neighborhood playing a prank. You know how Halloween is. Sarah forced a smile. Right, probably just a Halloween prank. Just then, her phone buzzed again. A message from the unknown number. You're good at keeping secrets, Sarah, but how long can you keep them? The walls seemed to close in on her. Whoever was doing this knew she was keeping the situation from the kids. It was a calculated, psychological game, and she had become an unwilling participant. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door unlocking. It was Jennifer and Mark, back from their dinner. As she greeted them, Sarah knew she had a lot to explain. But even as she prepared to recount the evening's unsettling events, a dreadful thought crept into her mind. Would revealing the truth put them all in greater danger? The mood had shifted irrevocably. The night that started as a joyful Halloween celebration had turned into something far more sinister. Chapter 4: Unveiling the Unthinkable. Jennifer and Mark listened intently as Sarah recounted the evening's unsettling events. Their eyes widened in disbelief and concern, their earlier cheerful demeanor replaced by palpable tension. "Sarah, why didn't you call us immediately? Or the police?" Jennifer's voice quivered as she spoke. "I didn't want to alarm you or ruin your anniversary dinner," Sarah hesitated. "And honestly, I didn't know if the police would take it seriously enough." Mark interjected. "We need to call the police now, no question about it." Just as Mark reached for his phone, Sarah's buzzed again. She looked at the screen and her heart sank. "Tell anyone and you'll regret it." The room suddenly felt cold, as if the walls themselves were listening. Sarah found herself at a crossroads. Should she reveal this latest message or keep it to herself? Mark dialed 911 and began explaining the situation to the dispatcher. Meanwhile, Sarah felt a growing unease. As much as she wanted to tell them about the last text, something held her back. It was as if a voice in her head was warning her of the grave consequences. After hanging up, Mark assured everyone, "The police will be here shortly to take our statements and look into the matter." Emily, who had been quietly observing, broke her silence. "Does this mean we can't go trick-or-treating next year?" Jason, trying to act more mature, scolded her. "Seriously, Emily? That's what you're worried about?" Sarah quickly intervened, trying to alleviate the mounting tension. "Let's not worry about next year. Let's focus on staying safe tonight." Just then, the doorbell rang. A wave of relief washed over Sarah. That must be the police, she thought. Mark opened the door, only to find a small package on the doormat. It was wrapped in black paper and adorned with a red ribbon. No one was in sight. As Mark cautiously picked it up, Sarah's phone buzzed once more. "Open it. Happy Halloween." The atmosphere grew stifling as Mark carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a small, ornate box. With bated breath, he opened it. A chilling laugh erupted from the box, a recorded cackle that sent shivers down everyone's spine. It was a Halloween prank toy, but under the circumstances, it was anything but amusing. Sarah finally decided to show the last text message to Mark and Jennifer. The color drained from their faces as they read it. They all realized the same unsettling truth. The person stalking Sarah had just been at their doorstep, leaving behind not just a package, but a terrifying promise of what could happen next. Chapter 5: The Tipping Point. Sarah sat in the living room, the chilling laugh from the prank box still echoing in her ears. Mark and Jennifer had ushered the kids upstairs, reminding them to stay in their rooms until they said otherwise. They had done so reluctantly, their youthful excitement dampened by the thick air of tension that hung in the room. Mark returned from upstairs and confirmed, "The kids are safe and secure, but I think it's time we consider a plan of action." Before anyone could speak, there was another knock at the door. This time, it was the police. 2 officers, both stern-faced but empathetic, entered the room. "We understand you've had a distressing evening," the taller one began, flipping open his notepad. As Mark and Jennifer explained the situation, Sarah's phone, which she had placed on the coffee table, buzzed once more. The room went quiet. "You can trust no one, Sarah, not even the police." Sarah hesitated for a moment, and then showed the message to the officers. "This just came in," she said, her voice tinged with desperation. The officers exchanged a worried glance. "We'll immediately look into this," the shorter one assured. "But, for tonight, would you consider staying somewhere else? Somewhere this person wouldn't know about?" Sarah looked at Mark and Jennifer, who both nodded in agreement. "We have a cabin about an hour away," Mark suggested. "It might be the safest option right now." With no time to lose, Sarah packed a quick bag, as did Mark and Jennifer. Despite the urgency, the house seemed to be closing in on Sarah, each tick of the clock amplifying her dread. As they all got into the car, Mark took a moment to address the gravity of the situation. "We're going to be okay," he said, though it was unclear if he was trying to reassure his family or himself. The drive to the cabin was silent, except for the low hum of the car's engine and the occasional crackle of the police radio. They reached the isolated cabin, its looming silhouette barely visible in the moonlight. Mark quickly unlocked the door and ushered everyone inside. Just as Sarah began to feel a sense of security, her phone buzzed again. Her hands trembling, she looked at the screen. "See you next Halloween, Sarah. The game has just begun." For a moment, she felt paralyzed. The message was clear. She had escaped danger for now, but the threat remained, lurking in the shadows until the next Halloween. Chapter 6, the next morning. As the first rays of the sun crept through the gaps in the curtains, the cabin felt less menacing, almost serene. Sarah awoke from a restless sleep, her dreams populated by faceless figures and ominous messages. Despite the light of day, she knew that the events of the previous night were far from a mere nightmare. Downstairs, Mark was already making coffee, the aroma filling the cabin. Jennifer joined him, looking as if she had hardly slept. "Morning," Sarah greeted, forcing a smile. "How did the kids sleep?" "As well as can be expected," Jennifer replied. "We told them we came here for an impromptu adventure. We'll have to explain everything eventually, but for now, it's better they don't know the full extent." The police had called earlier, letting them know that their house appeared secure and that they were continuing the investigation. Still, the unknown tormentor remained at large, a chilling thought that none of them could shake off. Just as they started discussing their plans for the day, Sarah's phone buzzed. She froze for a moment, afraid to look, but then saw it was a message from her roommate, Kate. "Hey, are you okay? Saw some weird guy hanging around your apartment building last night." Sarah's heart sank. The implication was horrifyingly clear. Whoever was stalking her knew where she lived. The feeling of being trapped intensified, closing in from all sides. Mark, noticing her expression, asked, "What's wrong?" Sarah showed him the text. The room went silent. "We need to involve your roommate in the police report," Jennifer suggested, her voice shaky. Just then, another message appeared on Sarah's phone from the unknown number. "You can run, but you can't hide, Sarah. Until next Halloween." The message was a direct challenge, a gauntlet thrown. It was clear now that the ordeal was far from over. It was merely paused, like the calm eye at the center of a storm. "Should we stay here longer?" Mark suggested, his voice tinged with desperation. Sarah pondered for a moment and then spoke. "No, hiding is not a solution. We need to face this head on, involve the police, and ensure our homes are secure. This person wants us to live in fear. We can't let that happen." Everyone nodded, acknowledging the grim but resolute path ahead. They packed their bags and locked up the cabin, knowing they were returning to an altered reality. As they drove back, each lost in their thoughts, Sarah couldn't help but feel that the events of this Halloween would haunt her for the rest of her life. Chapter 7, Behind the Mask. 2 weeks had passed since that dreadful Halloween night, and Sarah felt the strain of constant vigilance. Police had increased patrols in her area, but there were no new leads. Her friends and family tried to resume a sense of normalcy, yet a cloud of unease lingered over everything. One evening, while she was studying in the library, Sarah received an email notification. Expecting it to be from her professors, she opened it only to find a message from an unknown sender. Sarah, I hope you're not feeling too lonely. I'm always watching you. Attached was a picture, a blurry image taken from a distance, capturing Sarah in the library, engrossed in her books. Her pulse quickened, and a cold sweat broke out. She immediately left the library, unable to shake off the feeling of being observed. She called Mark and Jennifer, who advised her to come to their house immediately. Sarah arrived, her hands shaking as she held her phone, showing them the email. "This is intolerable," Jennifer said, visibly agitated. "We're going back to the police station, and we won't leave until they take this seriously." Upon their arrival, the police admitted the gravity of the situation. With the photographic evidence, it was clear that the stalker had escalated their tactics. "We'll upgrade this case to high priority," assured the detective. "And we're assigning an officer to keep an eye on your place until we catch this person." As they returned home, Sarah felt a fraction safer, but knew that until her stalker was identified, she would never be entirely at ease. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah started taking self-defense classes, a tacit admission that she might have to protect herself physically. She also installed security cameras in her apartment. It was around this time that she received another message, this time via a letter slipped under her door. "Do you feel safe behind your cameras, Sarah? You should know, a lens can work both ways." Sarah felt her heart drop into her stomach. The handwriting was shaky, almost like the letters were dancing in a chilling rhythm. She promptly turned the letter over to the police. "We'll analyze this for fingerprints," said the detective. "The level of obsession here suggests this isn't a random act. It's possible you may know this person, even if just superficially." That thought disturbed Sarah the most. The notion that her stalker might be someone she knew. As Thanksgiving approached, Sarah considered the things she was grateful for: her supportive family, her loyal friends, her own resilience. Yet, the sense of peace that should come with gratitude was tainted by the ongoing threat that loomed over her life. Until this person is caught, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and every other day is just a date on a calendar, she thought, grappling with her reality. Chapter 8. The Web Tightens. Thanksgiving was a muted affair, the tension palpable despite everyone's attempts at normal conversation. Sarah tried to focus on the moment, the warmth of being around her family, yet her thoughts kept drifting to the unsettling messages she'd been receiving. Her cousin, Emily, who had been relatively quiet during dinner, finally spoke up. "Sarah, I've noticed you've been a bit off today. Is everything all right?" Sarah hesitated. How much should she reveal? But looking into Emily's concerned eyes, she felt the burden of carrying her secret alone. "I've been getting messages and threats from an unknown person," Sarah confessed. "The police are involved, but they haven't found the person yet." The room went quiet, the jovial atmosphere replaced by one of grave concern. "That's terrifying, Sarah," Emily said. "If there's anything we can do to help, please let us know." Later that night, after the family had left and Sarah returned to her apartment, she found another letter tucked in her mailbox. Her hands shook as she read the familiar, shaky handwriting. "Did you enjoy your Thanksgiving, Sarah?" "I did. I had a great view." The realization that her stalker had been close enough to observe her during a family gathering sent a shiver down her spine. She immediately called the detective handling her case. The next morning, the police had an emergency meeting to discuss Sarah's situation. "We need to treat this as a high-risk stalking case," the detective said. "The individual is escalating. We should also explore connections within her close circles, friends, family, acquaintances. Sarah was brought in for questioning to build a more comprehensive profile of possible suspects. She racked her brain for anyone who might bear a grudge or have displayed obsessive tendencies, but no one fit the bill. Days later, Sarah was reviewing footage from her security cameras when she spotted something odd, a shadow moving past her window. She replayed the video, enhancing the image as much as she could. Although it was impossible to make out a face, the silhouette seemed vaguely familiar. Just then, her phone buzzed. "I hope you're finding the footage interesting. I always aim to be camera ready." The message left her frozen. Her stalker had access to her camera feeds. The violation of her privacy was total and complete. The unknown person always one step ahead of her and the police. Sarah felt like a puppet in a malevolent play, the strings pulled by an invisible hand tightening the web around her. Chapter 9. The Trap. In the weeks leading up to Christmas, the atmosphere in Sarah's world was stifling. Her stalker remained elusive, the threats ever increasing. To make matters worse, the person seemed to be privy to her conversations, her movements, and her thoughts, almost as if he or she was omnipresent. Determined not to succumb to despair, Sarah began brainstorming ways to turn the tables. If this person knows everything about me, maybe there's a way to use that against them, she thought. With the police coming up empty-handed, she decided to take matters into her own hands. Together with Mark and Jennifer, Sarah devised a plan. They would set a trap to catch the stalker. They chose the upcoming Christmas party at Mark and Jennifer's home as the setting. Sarah would act normal, posting about the event on social media, ensuring the stalker would know. Hidden cameras would be placed around the property, each disguised so well that even a discerning eye would miss them. As guests arrived at the party, each had to grapple with the unsaid tension. Any one of them could be Sarah's tormentor. Despite the festive decorations and cheerful music, a feeling of unease permeated the room. Midway through the evening, Sarah received a text message. "Beautiful party, Sarah. Enjoy it while you can." She discreetly signaled Mark and Jennifer, and they began monitoring the camera feeds from a separate room. Minutes turned into hours, but there was no sign of unusual activity. Just as they were about to lose hope, one of the cameras picked up a masked figure skulking near the back door of the house. Mark immediately called the police, who were on standby for this very scenario. Before they could arrive, however, the figure seemed to sense that something was amiss. He looked directly at the camera, as if peering into Sarah's soul, and vanished into the darkness. When the police arrived, they scoured the area but found no one. Despite the setback, they managed to capture a clear image of the masked individual from the camera footage. "The net is closing in," the detective assured Sarah. "With this evidence, we can intensify our investigation and, hopefully, unmask this individual soon." Sarah returned to the party, a mixture of relief and disappointment washing over her. Tonight had been a small victory, but the war was far from won. As she looked around at her friends and family, she couldn't help but wonder, was her tormentor among them? And if so, how could she ever feel safe again? Chapter 10. Unmasked. As the days grew colder and the year neared its end, Sarah felt as if she was living in a waking nightmare. Despite their best efforts, the police were no closer to identifying her stalker, who seemed to be growing bolder with each passing day. It was a week before New Year's when Sarah received a package with no return address. Inside was a mask, a grotesque representation of a human face twisted in agony. Accompanying it was a note, "Looking forward to seeing you wear this." That was the last straw. Sarah felt her strength collapse, and for the first time, she broke down in tears. It was as if the mask was a mirror, reflecting the torment and fear that had gripped her life. When she showed it to the detective, He knew they were running out of time. "We need to act now," he said. "We're going to put you under police protection until we catch this individual." The days under protection felt like a blur, a constant cycle of unfamiliar faces and routines as the police moved her from one safe house to another. And then, finally, a break in the case came. "We've identified a suspect," the detective announced. "Someone from your extended family, believe it or not. We've apprehended him, and you're safe now." Sarah felt a flood of emotions: relief, horror, disbelief. "Who is it?" she asked. When the detective revealed the name, Sarah felt her world collapse. It was a relative, someone she had known her entire life, someone who had been at all the family gatherings, holidays, and birthdays. The mask of normalcy had been ripped off, revealing the monster beneath. "Why?" was all Sarah could ask when she faced him during the trial. The man shrugged, a hollow look in his eyes. "I felt connected to you in a way I can't explain. It was as if you were the missing piece in my life, and I would do anything to claim you." Sarah shuddered, realizing the depth of his delusion. As he was led away to serve his sentence, she felt the weight of the past months lift off her shoulders, yet her heart was heavy with the betrayal. The experience had scarred her, but it had also made her resilient. As she stepped into the new year, Sarah knew that she had survived the darkest chapter of her life and emerged stronger. The mask had been lifted, the tormentor unmasked, but the journey to reclaim her peace was just beginning. The end.
Hey everyone, before we dive into today's stories, let's set an ambitious goal. Can we hit 200 likes on this video? Smashing that like button not only supports the channel, but it also helps us bring more stories your way. So go ahead, tap that like button, and let's make it happen. Chapter 1. The Invitation. The trill of Jess's ringtone pierced the silence of her cramped studio apartment. She paused the true crime documentary blaring on her laptop and glanced at the name flashing on her phone's screen. Anna. A genuine smile broke across Jess's face for the first time in weeks. She hadn't spoken to her old college roommate since before the pandemic hit. She swiped to answer, saying, "Well, hey there, stranger, it's been a minute." Anna's bubbly laugh flowed through the speaker. "Too long. I was starting to think you might have forgotten about me." "As if I could ever forget your bad singing in the shower," Jess teased. She curled up happily on her sofa, ready to catch up. After chatting about their lives and jobs, Anna cut to her reason for calling. "So, a bunch of us girls were thinking of renting one of those lakeside cabins at Bitterwood this weekend to relax. I figured you could use a little R&R yourself. What do you say?" Jess hesitated. The idea of driving for hours to bumble around the wilderness with Anna's rowdy friends sounded less than appealing. Her usual weekend plans involved pajamas, takeout, and Netflix. But Anna's pleading tone wore her down. "Come on. When's the last time you took a real vacation? You've got to get out of that apartment before you moss over completely. It'll be good for you." Jess sighed, eyeing the dust accumulating on every surface around her. Maybe Anna had a point. And really, did she have any better plans? "All right, fine. You've convinced me. A weekend at Bitterwood could be fun." She hoped the forced cheeriness in her voice sounded sincere. Anna squealed, babbling about how excited she was, and Jess couldn't help but smile again. A happy spell just seemed to radiate from Anna sometimes. Surely a few days away soaking up that positivity would do Jess good. They hashed out the trip details, and after hanging up, Jess sat pondering this impromptu disruption to her routine. A faint unease pricked at the corner of her mind, though she couldn't quite place why. Chalking it up to garden variety social anxiety, she put on some upbeat music and started packing. This weekend would be rejuvenating, she told herself, a much-needed reset out in nature. Still, as she drifted off to sleep that night, the echo of lapping waves seemed to creep under her door from the hallway, when surely no lakes lay within miles of her landlocked apartment. The phantom sounds followed her into fitful dreams of shadowed waters that left her unsettled upon waking. But there were preparations to be made. So Jess shoved away the shapeless anxieties needling at her subconscious and bustled about her small home, hoping the nervous energy buzzing through her veins would settle during the long drive ahead. Chapter 2. Road Trip. Jess arrived outside Anna's apartment building fashionably late the next morning. Her reliable old Subaru rumbled happily after the 2-hour drive out of the city, soaking up the sunshine. As soon as Anna emerged, lugging her floral suitcase, Jess knew she'd been right to come. Anna's wide, welcoming grin cracked her lingering reservations wide open. She leaned over to push open the passenger door, clearing a space amid the snack detritus covering her seats. Anna tossed in her bag and settled into the faded upholstery. "Sorry for the mess," Jess said sheepishly. "I wasn't sure how hungry we'd get." Anna just laughed, that melodic laugh Jess hadn't realized she'd missed so much. "Are you kidding? Road trip food is half the fun. Ooh, you brought sour straws." Jess smiled, basking in the familiar warmth of Anna's presence beside her, and pulled back onto the highway. They soon left behind the cramped office buildings and congested streets, replacing them with soaring evergreens and rolling pastures. Jess rolled down her window, breathing deep the earthy scent of wilderness drifting through the crisp autumn air. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. Anna fiddled with the radio dial until she landed on a pop station. Soon she was crooning dramatically along with the top 40 hits, dancing in her seat. Jess couldn't keep from giggling at her friend's antics. She had forgotten how much she loved Anna's carefree spirit. As the miles slid beneath her tires, Jess let the stresses of work and city life melt away. Out here, the world seemed immersed in a simpler light, vibrant leaves drifting lazily downward, sunlight dappling through the branches, the lonely cry of a hawk circling high above. Fall's natural splendor stretched out untouched to the horizon. By late afternoon, the paved highway gave way to a dusty gravel road winding deep into the pine barrens. Jess leaned forward and squinted through the trees until a weathered wooden sign emerged ahead. Camp Bitterwood. "We're here," Anna cheered. She turned the music down as they pulled into the deserted parking lot. Her celebratory smile faltered only a moment when she spotted Jess's apprehensive frown. "Chin up, Buttercup," she exclaimed. "This weekend is going to be amazing. Just you wait. Now let's go meet the others at our cabin before they drink all the wine." Jess plastered on an agreeable grin, hoping her unease at being so isolated out here didn't show. She focused on hauling their bags inside the cramped but cozy cabin nestled against the lake shore that would be their home for the next few nights. Laughter and happy shouts rang out to greet them as they stepped into the glow of the crackling fire their friends had started. Yes, this would be rejuvenating, Jess repeated in her head like a soothing mantra. She took a deep, steadying breath as the golden firelight flickered across her face, casting dancing shadows over the sun-worn wooden walls. Everything would be just fine. Chapter 3. First Signs. Dusk fell fast once the sun dipped behind the towering pines surrounding Camp Bitterwood. Jess sat tucked away on the cabin's small deck overlooking the lake, nibbling on the chili Anna heated up for dinner. She kept peering down at the dark Walter lapping gently 15 feet below, searching for she knew not what. Anna's boisterous friends chattered and laughed around the fire, their beer cans cracking open one after another as the night wore on. Jess didn't mind the solitude out here away from the chaos. She basked in the tranquility of the stars glimmering into visibility above the jagged black tree line, until faint splashing echoed up from the lake, followed by a soft but urgent whimper. Jess froze, straining her eyes toward the shoreline 50 yards left of her deck. A cloud must have briefly obscured the moon, for she could see nothing but fathomless shadows shifting there. Was someone swimming this late? Where were they? She stood, debating whether to call out, when Anna crashed through the sliding door behind her. "There you are," she exclaimed, pulling Jess into a slightly drunken hug. "Come tell us spooky stories." Jess glanced back reluctantly one more time, but the shore was peaceful once more. She let Anna tug her inside to the fire, shaking off the eerie sounds of her overactive imagination. Still, she felt cold fingers trail lightly down her neck before Anna closed the cabin door, making her shiver. Over the next few hours, Jess slowly relaxed again, lulled into complacency by the wine and the ridiculous ghost tales her friends told. She even shared a few of her own, laughing along with the others. Until a sharp scream from the lake cut through their chatter. The group fell silent, all turning to stare wide-eyed at the dark water beyond the cabin windows. A scream meant someone was hurting, or else horribly frightened. Jess stood, heart suddenly racing. She knew that scream had been no drunken illusion. "Someone's in trouble out there," she said shakily. But her friends just blinked up at her in confusion, offering hesitant chuckles. "What scream?" Anna asked, shooting her a concerned look. "I didn't hear anything." Unease crept cold fingers down Jess's spine. How could they not have heard a sound that loud and clear? She rushed for the back deck again, desperate to peer into the night's impenetrable void. Behind her, nervous laughter echoed among her friends at this bizarre behavior. Only endless darkness greeted Jess at the railing as she strained every sense trying to penetrate the silence. Had she imagined it after all? But no. Every hair on her body still prickled with residual alarm. She knew that agonized scream had been real as the goosebumps rising on her arms. Real and close. Far too close for comfort. Jess retreated inside, anxiety swelling, trying to ignore the concerned stares of her friends. She mumbled excuses about feeling tired, slipping into bed to stare wide-eyed at the dark ceiling beams above her, waiting endlessly for the scream to pierce the night once more. But this time, only foreboding quiet filled her straining ears, broken occasionally by raucous giggles from the girls still swapping stories around the dying fire. Sleep remained out of reach for Jess that night as she tossed and turned beneath her wool blanket. The waiting darkness seemed alive somehow here, a predator lurking just out of sight, watching, seeking the perfect moment to reveal itself, and she was trapped as its prey with nowhere to run. So she lay restless in the looming shadows, counting her frantic heartbeats, knowing with cold certainty the haunting of Bitterwood Lake had already begun. This place held a sinister secret her soul recognized, even if she could not yet name it. But its dark revelation would come soon enough. Of that Jess had no doubt. Something evil lurked within these woods, and it had turned a hungry eye upon her the moment she arrived. Chapter 4. Legends of Bitterwood. Morning sunshine finally chased away the ominous shadows haunting Jess's restless night. She rose groggily from the lumpy cabin bed, body aching from tension. The other girls were still passed out like the dead after their late-night revelry. Jess poured herself a strong cup of coffee, hoping the caffeine could shock some alertness into her foggy mind. She carried it out to the deck, determined to shake off last night's paranoid unease. But in the harsh light of day, nothing seemed amiss in the pastoral landscape. Squinting against the glinting sun, Jess noticed a lone fisherman in a tiny boat bobbing near the middle of the lake. On impulse, she called out, "How's the fishing this morning?" The old man glanced back in surprise before motoring closer. "Not much biting today, miss. You folks just arriving to Bitterwood?" Jess smiled, encouraged by the man's friendly demeanor. "Yeah, my friends and I are staying in that cabin for the weekend. It's a gorgeous area out here." The fisherman frowned, his weathered face growing somber beneath his worn cap. "Aye, gorgeous it may be. But not everything is as it seems at Bitterwood." Alarm prickled across Jess's skin at his ominous tone. She kept her reply light despite the dread pooling in her gut. "What? You don't think this place is haunted or anything, do you?" She forced a playful laugh. The man simply gazed back, eyes dark with knowing. These woods have long kept their secrets. But if you stay here, you may just learn their mysteries. With that cryptic response, he restarted his sputtering engine and motored away, leaving Jess staring uneasily after him. She hoped desperately he was just an eccentric local trying to spook the tourists. But she had a sickening feeling his warnings held more truth than she cared to examine. By the time Jess returned inside, the other girls were finally stirring. While they cooked a subdued breakfast, she nervously relayed the fisherman's remarks. Her friends glanced around uneasily as she spoke. Finally, Anna replied, "Okay, yeah, that's super creepy. But ghosts aren't real, right?" The quiver in her voice belied her light words. There must be some legend around here that he was talking about, Jess mused. She needed to understand what evil had seeped into this land, casting a darkness over their carefree weekend. Let's ask around and see what we can find out. The group reluctantly agreed, so after eating, they drove to the main camp office. The scruffy manager chuckled at Jess's query about Bitterwood myths. "You city kids and your ghost stories," he said while totaling up their camping fees. But at their crestfallen faces, he relented. "All right, I'll play along. Folks round here do say Bitterwood Lake is haunted by Elizabeth Opal, the drowned bride." He recounted the tale of a beautiful young newlywed who fell to her death in the lake decades ago, just days after her wedding. Some claimed her distressed ghost still cried out from the dark waters for her lost love. But these are just campfire fancies, of course, he added upon noticing Jess's evident unease. She glanced outside at the placid lake with new wariness, for legends often carry an anchor in truth, she knew. And she was starting to realize the malicious spirit said to occupy Bitterwood's waters had turned its lonely eyes upon her. Chapter 5. Restless Spirits. That evening, Jess sat tensely on the cabin's back deck, eyes glued to the lake. She had excused herself from the revelry inside, too anxious to pretend all was well. The others had laughed off the bride legend as silly folklore, but Jess knew some darker essence haunted this place. She could feel its gaze crawling across her skin even now in the fading light. "Where are you?" she silently implored the hidden watcher. "Show yourself." Her impatience for a decisive confrontation mounting, she almost hoped to see a phantom bride rise from the lake at last. As twilight deepened, a thin mist began curling over the still water. Jess shivered, the damp air needling through her thin sweater. A flicker of movement at the lake's far end made her bolt upright. The mist was forming an elongated shape, almost like a woman's veil. But as she stared, the delicate wisps drifted apart, erased by a slight breeze. Jess's pulse hammered in her ears. No, it must have been a trick of the shadows. She sank back into her lawn chair, nerves jangling, until a mournful wail pierced the night, like a lost spirit calling across the water. Goosebumps erupted across Jess's flesh. That was no loon's cry. It spoke of sorrow and rage. She glanced desperately back at the party blazing inside the cabin. Music and laughter drowned out the unearthly sounds only she could hear. Surely she couldn't be imagining the malice echoing now around the lake's shrouded perimeter. A splashing splash made Jess whip her head toward the left shoreline. She glimpsed for one heart-stopping second a pale female form breaching the water. Silvery hair framed the translucent face, staring back at Jess with hollow, beseeching eyes. Then the phantom sank soundlessly beneath the inky surface once more. Jess gripped the railing hard, willing herself not to faint or cry out. This was the ancient spirit who had fixated on her. She felt its fury boring into her back as she fled inside. But her panicked gasps only drew concerned looks from her friends. None had heard the anguished wailing outside, or seen that desperate, ghostly woman grasping for help just out of reach. Harsh laughter rang out at Jess's stammered description of the spirit bride she'd witnessed. Anna gripped her shoulder firmly, speaking with exaggerated calmness as if addressing a child. "Hon, I know you're stressed out, but there are no ghosts here. You're letting this spooky legend get to you." Patronizing disbelief shone from all their faces, but Jess knew what she'd seen, and she had a terrifying premonition that her stay at the lake was soon to turn much deadlier. Chapter 6. Targeted. A sense of dread hounded Jess's steps throughout the next day. She jumped at shadows, constantly peering over her shoulder for pursuers she could not see. But no ghostly form emerged from lake or woods to attack. Perhaps it was biding its time, luring prey into complacency before striking. By dusk, Jess could no longer stomach sitting around the fire with her indifferent friends. She needed to confront the spirit that seemed to be toying with her. Waiting only built her panicked anticipation to unbearable levels. Leaving the others singing drunkenly, she strode alone to the end of the moonlit dock. Only a velvet void met her demands that the watcher show itself. Wind moaned softly through the pines, mimicking a distressed woman's cries. Shivering as much from fear as from cold, Jess finally turned to go back. But halfway down the dock, the spectral wailing erupted close behind her. She whirled to see mist coalescing at the dock's end into an elongated silhouette. The phantom bride had returned. Jess stumbled backwards, eyes fixed on its translucent form undulating toward her. This was no legend. The spirit's palpable fury buffeted Jess like a winter gale. Lank hair and sodden dress swayed around the pale bride as she hovered down the dock. Right before she reached Jess's frozen form, the phantom dove over the side and disappeared into the lake once more. The ensuing silence rang in Jess's ears after that show of supernatural force. She raced back to the cabin on trembling legs. But Anna just sighed when Jess burst in, babbling about the vengeful ghost's nearly tangible presence on the dock. "I think it's time you lay off the wine, hon," she said gently, refusing to acknowledge the terror bright in Jess's eyes. Jess finally collapsed into bed, knowing she alone carried this burden. The bride's restless spirit had brought a palpable darkness to Bitterwood, and only she recognized the danger coiled there under the deceptive serenity. Why had the phantom chosen her and not one of the others? She rested uneasily beneath her blankets, fearing whatever revelation the morning light might bring. Morning's arrival did nothing to ease Jess's mind. Heavy rain clouds approached, shrouding the woods in gloom. As she stared absently across the lake from the back deck with a mug of coffee, she began noticing disturbing signs of an otherworldly visitor. Muddy footprints led away from the water and stopped beneath her bedroom window. Dried red stains flecked the glass pane above the sill. And when she rushed inside to check, she discovered long gashes had sliced through her pillow overnight. Stuffed white feathers clung to crusted blood left by the unseen claws. Jess's hands began to shake, spilling hot coffee over her numb fingers. She scarcely felt the pain. This attack confirmed the phantom's sole focus was now her. Paralyzed by the implied threat, Jess remained huddled on the sofa while her friends spent the day playing cards and poking fun at her paranoia. Their jabs barely registered through the static filling her skull. She stared fixedly at the lake's steel surface, ominously still today except when ripples hinted at the evil gliding unseen below. She longed desperately to escape this place, but night was falling fast. Darkness would bring a silencing shroud, preventing any cries for help from penetrating these dense woods. But screams were sure to come, once that patient predator chose to strike. Chapter 7. Possession. The day's tension reached an unbearable peak once shadows stole over Bitterwood. Jess paced the creaking floorboards, peering out at the woods as if the trees themselves might suddenly come to gruesome life. Her friend's escalating concern did little to ease her terror. They couldn't fathom the forces threatening to consume her. A timid knock at the front door made everyone freeze. Before Jess could stop her, Anna swung it open to reveal a haggard older woman hunched against the wind. She clutched a wool shawl around bony shoulders, stringy white hair whipping over her face. Behind her, the stormy sky had turned an ominous crimson. "You shouldn't be here," the woman rasped at Jess, weathered features creased with urgency. "The bride. She wants you." Stunned silence met this dire pronouncement. Jess's pounding heart nearly drowned out the wind screeching through the trees beyond. The woman clasped Jess's hands with surprising strength. "You must leave this place at once," she implored, watery eyes wide with insistence. "I know what Elizabeth wants. Please go before it's too late. Before Jess could respond, Anna stepped protectively between them. I'm so sorry, but I think you're confused, she said firmly. We don't know any Elizabeth. She glanced uncertainly at Jess, who stared back in dismayed recognition. You know I speak the truth, the woman said sadly. But she turned and hobbled away into the gathering storm without another word. Anna quickly shut out the howling gale and barred the door behind their unexpected visitor. Can we leave? Jess pleaded to the room. That woman confirmed this cabin is haunted by some vengeful spirit named Elizabeth. She said it's after me. Her friends exchanged uneasy glances as lightning flashed outside, revealing strange shadows writhing across the walls before vanishing. The wind rattled the roof violently, as if seeking entry. Anna took a deep breath. Jess, you're clearly under a lot of stress. I should have never forced you to come here when you weren't ready. She trailed off helplessly. The hurt in her eyes at Jess's frantic rejection of her good intentions briefly broke through the panicked haze fogging Jess's mind. Anna had only wanted to help her relax and have fun. How could she explain the inexplicable darkness poisoning this place? Deflated, Jess squeezed Anna's hand in mute apology. Neither could accept the other's desperate truths. Outside, the storm intensified into a screaming maelstrom. The girls huddled anxiously in the fire-lit main room, hoping the cabin would withstand the onslaught. Except for Jess, who kept peering out the back windows toward the whipping lake. She knew the true threat came not from wind or rain, but from malicious spirits using nature's fury to shroud their approach. Even her friends let out cries of alarm when heavy thuds sounded on the roof, like clawed feet stomping overhead. But the noise faded, leaving no evidence of a physical intruder. Eventually, the girls settled onto couches and chairs, exhausted from their frayed nerves. One by one, they drifted to uneasy slumber. But Jess remained alert, watching the windows for ghostly faces. She hoped to catch a glimpse of the bride before she made her move. Around 3 a.m. by the grandfather clock's pendulum, the power abruptly cut out, submerging the cabin in absolute darkness. Jess gasped, gripping her chair arms as anxious voices called out around her. A sharp hiss by her ear made her whip her head around, but only impenetrable shadows filled her straining eyes. Cold fingers trailed down her cheek. Jess opened her mouth to scream a warning, but no sound came. She thrashed violently, yet her limbs would not respond. A cloying scent like rotting lilies choked off her breath. Desperate, she focused all her energy into a single fingertip. The effort made sweat bead on her forehead despite the frigid air. Slowly, agonizingly, she dragged her index finger onto the arm of the chair in Morse code. H-E-L-P. A floorboard creaked nearby, followed by Anna's quivering voice pleading into the dark. Jess? Jess, please say something. The phantom's oppressive hold kept Jess paralyzed and mute. But she tapped her desperate message over and over until suddenly the suffocating grip released her from its clutches. Jess collapsed forward, gagging for air. Strong hands grabbed her shoulders and she cried out hoarsely. But it was only Anna and the others, faces etched with fear in the faint glow of a lone candle. What happened? Anna begged. You went all stiff. We couldn't get a response. Jess just shook her head wildly, tears of relief streaming down her cheeks at being freed from that smothering void. But she sensed this was only the start of the spirit's ruthless siege to possess her soul. Chapter 8. Sacrifice. No one slept the remainder of that endless night. The girls huddled anxiously in the candlelit cabin, listening to the ongoing storm rage outside. Inside, the gloom swirled with unseen currents of malevolence just beyond their sight. Jess sat shuddering uncontrollably, skin clammy from her close call. At dawn, a decision was made. They had to flee this cursed place before the phantom returned. Anna and Jess's friends seemed shaken enough by the paranormal attack to finally heed her warnings of danger. They quickly packed bags with trembling hands, eager to escape the confines of the haunted cabin. But when Jess stepped cautiously outside to lead the group to the cars, her blood turned to ice. Resting innocuously on the back deck waited a wedding gown, the white lace soaked through with dark stains. Crimson footprints left a gory trail all the way back to the lake's edge. Jess stared at the foreboding sight, bile rising in her throat. The spirit was sending a twisted message. It would claim Jess's essence for itself one way or another. Whether she left here alive mattered not to the covetous phantom. Sensing the hideous ploy, rage temporarily overpowered Jess's dread. She refused to spend her life glancing over her shoulder for this sadistic entity. Better to face it now than be forever stalked by its possessive evil. Ignoring her friend's frantic protests, Jess stormed down the twisting trail left by the bloodied footprints. Their coppery stench mixed sickeningly with rotten floral perfume, assaulting her senses. She gagged, but pushed on toward Destiny's final standoff. At the end of the gruesome path, only gray mist swirled over the placid lake. Jess walked to the very edge of the doomed bride's watery tomb. "Come out and face me, you coward!" she screamed into the stillness. Her voice echoed over the waiting expanse. "I won't become your prisoner. If you want me, come and take me." She panted harshly, adrenaline and anger coursing through her veins. The calm surface slowly began swirling counterclockwise as a shadow rose from the depths. Elizabeth's pale face crested the water, droplets streaming from her sunken features. Her placid expression twisted into a hungry smile when she spied her intended victim waiting helplessly before her. Reality seemed to waver around Jess, the only solid point the phantom bride drifting closer. This was not some legend. The ancient malevolence here was catastrophically real. Jess took an unsteady step back, wondering if she could outrun death itself. Before the ghost reached Jess, an ear-piercing shriek rent the air behind her. She whirled to see Anna sprinting down the dock, anguish carved into her familiar features. Jess instinctively rushed to intercept her instead. "Anna, stop! What are you doing?" she cried. But her friend barreled past, flinging herself off the end of the dock straight at the waiting phantom. Jess screamed as she helplessly watched Anna hit the water and sink beneath the ghost's outstretched arms. The spirit's shocked face morphed into an outraged howl. Anna's sacrifice had disrupted her murderous plan, stealing Jess out of her grasp. The bride thrashed violently, churning the lake into a whirlpool trying to regain her intended victim. But Jess clung to the dock, her horrified eyes never leaving the spot where her selfless friend had disappeared below. After what felt like an eternity, the maelstrom stilled. The wrathful spirit sank slowly back into the silent depths, her prize stolen away. Jess lay frozen in shock and anguish. Around her, the woods seemed to exhale in relieved release as the malevolent presence retreated into dormancy. When Jess finally could move again, she scanned the water frantically for any sign of Anna. Her despairing gaze landed on a pale face drifting limply along the shoreline. Jess dove in heedless of danger and swam for her friend's motionless form. She dragged the waterlogged body onto the muddy bank, collapsing beside it in grief. Sobs racked Jess's exhausted frame as she clung to her cherished friend, who had sacrificed everything to save her. The others arrived in a frenzied rush, crying out at the tragic scene. They managed to revive Anna enough to breathe raggedly, though she remained terrifyingly still. As the girls prepared the car to rush her to a hospital, Jess knelt in the dirt by Anna's head. "Why?" she choked out. "Why would you jump in the lake for me?" Anna's eyes cracked open, full of sorrow and love. "I saw your pain," she rasped. "You have so much life yet to live." She tried weakly to lift a comforting hand to Jess's cheek, but it fell limply back to earth. They drove away in mourning silence, the spectral bride's cruel laughter echoing across the lake. She had lost this contest, but her vengeance would simply pass to another vulnerable soul. Such was the endless cycle here, Bitterwood's legacy of corruption. Anna lingered in the hospital for weeks before the doctors said she could go home. Jess rarely left her side during the long recovery. She drove Anna to rehab sessions, helped her walk again, and simply sat with her on hard days when depression sank its claws in. After a lifetime of taking Anna's giving nature for granted, Jess promised herself she would spend every remaining moment proving her own selfless love in return. Anna never spoke of what she experienced in the lake's numbing depths after sacrificing herself to the vengeful ghost. Some old horrors cannot be put into words, but late at night, Jess would sometimes hear her crying out desperately in her sleep. On those haunted nights, all Jess could do was hold her tighter and channel all the strength she had into keeping the darkness at bay. Chapter 9: The Only Way Out. Though we drove away from that wretched lake, I could feel its evil presence following me, hungry for a return to finish what it started. Anna's selflessness had disrupted the spirit's plan, but not destroyed it. My nights twisted into horrors of feeling that phantom bride's clammy hands dragging me down into the depths as I struggled vainly. I'd wake drenched in sweat, hearing her distant screams of promised retribution. Dark circles hung permanently under my eyes. At home, strange events escalated despite Anna's attempts to keep me calm. Bulbs burst when I entered rooms, gusts of cold air swept behind me, and objects went missing only to reappear in bizarre places I knew I hadn't left them. The haunted look in my eyes scared Anna most of all. She decided I couldn't spend another minute in that town, so near the vengeful ghost yearning to reclaim me. Without telling our families, we packed our few belongings and left that very night. We drove for hours with no destination in mind. I hoped desperately that distance could save me, though the clinging miasma of bitterwood never fully lifted from my spirit. When we stopped for gas at dawn, I used the last of my cash to pay and we pushed onward. We abandoned the car outside a small seaside town hundreds of miles from the cursed lake. Starting over with nothing was still better than waiting helplessly for that malignant spirit to fulfill its craving. The salty air cleared my head as we walked the pier lined with quaint shops. No ghosts haunted this cheerful place. For the first time in ages, I remembered what peace felt like. Anna smiled gently at the change coming over me. We found a warm inn to stay in and kind owners who needed help cleaning rooms. They let us live there and work to pay off our boarding. Though we missed home, this new life was built with our own hands, free of lingering darkness. But a familiar dread gripped my heart arriving back at the inn one winter afternoon. Glancing up at our window, I saw the lace curtains billowing wildly, though the air was still. No mundane draft could unleash such fury. Panic surged through me. I rushed upstairs only to find the door hanging open. Inside, our cozy room was destroyed. Furniture smashed, clothes shredded and strewn about. My pulse roared in my ears. This was no normal break-in. In the bathroom, the shattered mirror showed words scrawled in red. "You cannot hide from me." Bile rose in my throat. After months of reprieve, the vengeful ghost had tracked me down. Our haven was now contaminated by an ancient evil obsessed with claiming my life. When I told Anna, stark fear filled her sunken eyes for the first time since we'd escaped Bitterwood. She had sacrificed so much to free me from that demon. Neither of us could bear sacrificing more. The inn owners tried soothing our hysterics, unable to see the true danger. But we knew our presence here endangered them too. That night we slipped away silently, leaving behind everything but the clothes we wore. We became fugitives constantly on the run, taking odd jobs under assumed names, barely scraping by, looking over our shoulders everywhere we went. No shelter lasted long before violent manifestations shattered our fragile sense of security. Years of evading that obsessive phantom drained life and hope from me. My youth withered under an unrelenting dread. But finally, I hit upon the only way out, to remove its vessel for stalking me. One night after Anna fell into restless sleep, I crept away with purpose. I stared for a long time at the murky river, mentally preparing for what had to be done. There could be no hesitation. After I slipped under the current and let the cold water embrace me, I saw Anna's stricken face appear above me on the shore. As darkness enclosed me, I breathed a silent apology to my devoted friend for breaking my promise to her. My death was the only way to set us both free. I awoke to rain pattering on my cheeks. Muddy riverbank cushioned my back. With a cry, I sat up. I was still alive. Anna knelt beside me, cheeks streaked with tears and rain. "You saved me," I rasped in awe. She shook her head. "No. You saved us both when you were willing to sacrifice everything, as I once did." Anna helped me stand on shaky legs. Together we walked away from the river that nearly claimed me. I realized then that the ghost had never wanted my essence, only to twist my own life against me until it destroyed us. But I would not let it win. Though we never fully escaped the phantom's lingering presence, over time we learned to deny it power. Joy could be found, even within the haunting. Anna and I shored each other's light against the dark. The bride's wails still echo in my dreams, stirring primal panic. But I turn away from that darkness and awaken to gentle dawn light filtering through lace curtains in the little apartment Anna and I have made our sanctuary. The ghost of Bitterwood will always lurk in the periphery, craving the lives it failed to consume. But it does not own us. Each day we steal back from its grip. We grow stronger and leave its grasp further behind. For it is only the frigid past, while we face the future. And if it comes for me again, as I fear it someday shall, this time I will not run or sacrifice myself to escape. I will simply turn and walk on, focusing my sight on the light ahead. The light we have earned through so much darkness. For love is the only weapon that redeems. Chapter 10. Still haunted. In the years since I escaped the grasp of Bitterwood's vengeful spirit, I finished school and became a paranormal investigator. I travel the country seeking answers about the mysteries that haunt so many. Each case provides catharsis, helping exorcise my lingering trauma. But when a desperate letter arrived begging for aid at a familiar lodge near Bitterwood Lake, dread gripped me. The owner wrote of unexplained incidents, violent nocturnal attacks, apparitions stalking guests, cries emanating from the water at night. The bride was still searching for surrogate victims after I slipped her grasp. Though every fiber of my being recoiled, I knew I had to face the evil I unleashed as a reckless youth. If I could help spare others the torment I barely survived, it would bring the closure I craved. So I found myself again driving down that isolated road lined by gnarled trees that still poisoned my dreams. I glanced constantly at the passenger seat where my friend Anna always sat in better times. But for this trip, I came alone. The resort parking lot was deserted in the off-season chill. Across the gray lake, tendrils of mist swirled over the still surface. It looked placid enough, yet I could feel the brooding hunger pulsing beneath those dark depths. The aging owner greeted me with evident relief, escorting me inside the ill-fated lodge. My heart clenched passing the cabin where a ghost had once marked me for its own. Scorch marks now scarred its weathered exterior. That night I sat alone in the lodge's main hall, armed only with recording equipment and grit. The phantom arrived silently on the strike of midnight, a pale nimbus formed by the bar, slowly taking the silhouette of a veiled woman. My stomach lurched at the sight of Elizabeth's restless shade after all this time. Her empty eyes found me as a cruel smile twisted her spectral face. She clearly savored my obvious discomfort being back under her influence. The temperature dropped precipitously as she opened her mouth in a piteous wail only I could hear. But I steeled myself against her manipulations. Tonight we would come to terms. If I could glean why she remained so fixated on tormenting the living, perhaps I could convince her spirit to move on at last. "I'm here to help you find peace," I said clearly. The phantom continued drifting closer as I spoke. "Tell me why you're still haunting Bitterwood after all these years." A ghastly susurration arose surrounding me. I couldn't make out words, only a cacophony of anguished voices. The spirit was trying to lure me into her madness. "Let go of your pain," I urged, hands balling into fists. "Your suffering ties you here. But you can be free." She halted, cocking her head in an oddly innocent gesture of curiosity. For a moment I thought I had broken through. Then her banshee wailing resumed, shaking the walls with its force. The ghastly bride surged forward to loom directly over me, extending her pale hands like she meant to drag me back to a cold grave with her. I squeezed my eyes shut, focusing every fiber of will on resisting her pull. A powerful force suddenly flung me backward. My head cracked against the floorboards and brilliant light exploded across my vision. Silence rang out, broken only by the thud of my heartbeat. When I managed to sit up, cradling the knot on my skull, the spirit had vanished. The room's temperature was rising to normal. Glancing at my camera footage showed only an empty bar throughout our confrontation. As always, the phantom left no hard evidence of its existence, only lingering trauma. Though I failed to appease her, the fact that she attacked meant I had shaken the ghost's absolute control here. Few have dared stand against her possessive fury. But fighting darkness cannot be done alone. To protect the innocent souls she yet threatens, I must spread the truth about the bride's perpetual violence and malice. This evil has haunted Bitterwood for too long, passing from one hapless target to the next. But through understanding this legendary ghost as the sadistic predator she truly is, we can deprive her of the power fear grants. She will always prowl the boundaries of the living, craving the brightness she can never again possess. But we who still draw breath deny her dominion through the simple act of living on and loving freely. The bride's cold grasp cannot hold those who turn from her torturous shroud to walk joyfully arm in arm toward the light. Well, that's it, folks. I really hoped you enjoyed this story and it didn't scare you too much. If you're enjoying these spine-tingling tales and want to dive even deeper into the world of suspense and horror, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. By subscribing, you'll be the first to hear our latest eerie stories and embark on thrilling audio journeys with us. Don't miss out on a single shiver or chill. Subscribe now and become part of our ever-growing community of horror enthusiasts.
Chapter 1. The Status Quo. The jarring blare of Jane's alarm clock tore her violently from a deep sleep. She fumbled in groggy confusion to silence the intolerable buzzing, not ready to surrender the peace of sleep. But mere minutes later, the alarm resumed its assault. With great reluctance and a frustrated groan, Jane dragged herself out of bed to face another dreary day. Trudging to the bathroom, she grimaced at her reflection in the harsh light. Faint but unmistakable dark circles hung below her hazel eyes, which peered back at her dull and listless. Though only 25 years old, small lines had begun to form across her forehead. "You're too young to look so worn out," she muttered to herself. She turned on the faucet and doused her face in cold water, trying in vain to wash away the perpetual exhaustion that clung to her. After throwing on an old pair of jeans and the first clean work shirt she could find, Jane made a small pot of dark coffee. The rich aroma perked her up ever so slightly as she poured a steaming mug. She then filled a bowl with food for her cat Frumpy, who trotted happily over and brushed against her legs in gratitude. "At least I have you to keep me company," Jane said, as she reached down to give him a few absent-minded pets. The drive to work was as dull and uneventful as ever. Jane sipped her hot coffee, but could feel its effects diminishing before she had even arrived. As an accounting assistant at a small distribution company, her days consisted of combing through endless spreadsheets, verifying numbers and discrepancies. While the work itself was not altogether challenging, its sheer monotony wore down Jane's spirit day after lifeless day. Settling heavily into the worn chair in her cramped cubicle, Jane glanced around at the off-white walls that enclosed her. She had attempted to brighten up the space with a small potted plant on her desk, but it remained hopelessly dreary. With a resigned sigh, she logged onto her computer to begin the long day ahead. "Just power through this, then you can go home and zone out," she told herself, without conviction. But the thought of another empty evening in her apartment provided little comfort. As Jane mechanically sorted through a backlog of emails, she found her restless mind wandering. She began imagining, as she often did, how different her life could be. a job that provided a sense of purpose and fulfillment, an engaging social life, full of stimulating friends and activity, travel, adventure, new experiences that broke up the monotony she felt trapped in. But at 25 and settled securely into her ways, she had no idea how to manifest this mythical, exciting existence. The hours crawled by at an agonizing, lethargic pace, each minute feeling like a small eternity. Jane could not focus on her work as her mind grasped desperately for some mental diversion to pass the time. She glanced repeatedly at the clock on her computer screen, willing the hands to move faster. When the clock finally granted her freedom at 5 p.m. sharp, she rose hastily, feeling at once drained yet anxious to flee. Arriving home, Jane went through the motions on autopilot. She provided Frumpy with his usual dinner, which he ate enthusiastically. Though happy to see his owner, he could not relieve the loneliness Jane felt. She picked at a frozen meal for herself, appetite dulled by the monotony of her day. She tried reading a novel, but could not invest her mind in imagined lives when her own felt so lacking. The television provided only superficial distraction from her thoughts. She flipped half-heartedly through channels before turning it off with a resigned sigh. Jane's gaze drifted aimlessly around her small but tidy apartment. She had made an attempt to brighten up the place with some simple decorations, but it remained hopelessly bland. The bare white walls and impersonal style reflected the flatness that had seeped into her life. There were no photos of loved ones, no posters or art that spoke of her interests. No signs she had much of a social life at all anymore. A creeping sadness weighed on Jane as she once again thought there must be more to life than this. At 25 years old, she felt too young to be so apathetic and weary, but she didn't know how to grasp at something better for herself. The promise of a more engaging existence felt impossibly distant. Exhausted by her complete disinterest in her own life, Jane climbed into bed early, wishing for nothing more than to let sleep transport her, at least briefly, away from her circumstances. As she drifted in and out of hazy dreams, she found herself longing for the adventure, passion, and companionship her reality lacked. But she had no idea how to manifest those yearnings hidden deep within her. Oblivious to Jane, forces outside of her control were about to set in motion a drastic turn of events.
Hey everyone, if you're enjoying these spine-chilling stories, do me a favor. Hit that like button and smash subscribe. It helps to keep the horrors coming your way. Don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss a scare. Thanks for watching.
Chapter 2. The Complication. Monday mornings were always difficult for Jane, and this one was no exception. Her weekend had provided minimal relief from the monotonous grind of her daily routine. The hours had slipped past in a haze of household chores, solitary meals, and mindless television. Even a lunch outing with a few casual work acquaintances had left Jane feeling dissatisfied. She found she had little in common anymore with these women who seemed content with their predictable lives. Settling in at her desk, Jane tried to focus on the stack of paperwork awaiting her attention. But within an hour, she could feel her mind threatening to wander. Out of habit, she found herself glancing repeatedly at the time displayed on her computer monitor, though it barely seemed to budge. "Come on, Jane, you need this job," she muttered to herself. "Just power through." She shook her head sharply in an attempt to disrupt her malaise and tried to direct her attention back to the documents and spreadsheets laid out before her. But soon, she found herself daydreaming again about the more fulfilling existence she wished she could discover. A knock on her cubicle wall jarred Jane from her aimless thoughts. She looked up to see her manager, Charles, standing over her with an unreadable expression on his face. "Sorry if I'm interrupting," he said. "Do you have a few minutes to talk in my office?" Jane felt a knot forming in her stomach. Was she about to be reprimanded for spacing out at work? Or even worse, fired. She had no choice but to nod politely and follow Charles to his office. Charles closed the office door behind him and motioned for Jane to take a seat across from his desk. She perched nervously on the edge of the chair, trying to guess at what this meeting could be about. "Relax, Jane. You're not in any trouble," Charles said gently, seeming to sense her anxiety. "In fact, what I wanted to discuss may come as welcome news." Jane exhaled slowly, but continued looking at him with puzzlement. Where was this going? "As you know," Charles continued, "I'll be retiring at the end of next month. I know this is short notice, but I wanted to talk to you first about taking over my position as department manager." Jane's eyes widened in surprise. She had not seen this coming at all. "I think with some additional training you'd thrive in this role," Charles explained. "You have the experience, competence, and dedication. And frankly, you've gone as far as you can here as an assistant. I'd like to see you move up and take on more responsibility." Charles looked at Jane expectantly, but she remained too stunned to respond right away. Her mind raced as she processed this sudden opportunity. Of course, a promotion would come with substantially higher pay and status in the company. As a single woman trying to pay down student loans, she could really use the extra money. And it was flattering to be recognized for her hard work. But as a manager, the already long hours would expand further, eating into her limited free time. She would be accountable for her department's entire performance and productivity. The increased pressure and responsibilities could be immense. Was climbing the corporate ladder how she wanted to spend her days? Or would it only trap her further? The impatient but earnest look on Charles's face told Jane he was awaiting an enthusiastic response. But all she could muster was a conflicted nod and murmur of gratitude before asking if she could take a day to consider the offer. Back at her desk, Jane's mind reeled. This unexpected complication had crashed abruptly into her monotonous life, threatening to tip the scales one way or another. The timid part of her wanted to clutch at the familiar status quo. But there was an undeniable appeal to doing something bold and decisive for once. The time had come for Jane to make a choice that could change the course of her life. Chapter 3: Crossing the Threshold. Jane tossed and turned all night, unable to quiet her churning thoughts enough to sleep. Charles's offer had thrust an unexpectedly difficult decision into her lap. On one hand, she could continue along the safe and predictable path she knew by accepting the promotion. The extra income would be a great help, and any change of pace from her monotonous routine seemed appealing. But alarms nagged at the back of Jane's mind. She had seen previous managers at the company work longer and longer hours under ever-growing pressure from corporate. They always looked exhausted and complained of constant stress headaches. Did she really want to sacrifice any more of her personal time and sanity for a soulless job? As the first rays of sun peeked through her bedroom curtains, Jane crawled out of bed, feeling unsettled. Her morning routine did little to shake the uncertainty that clouded her mind. As she pulled into the office parking lot, she realized she was no closer to making a decision than the day before. Settling heavily at her desk, Jane tried to distract herself by sifting half-heartedly through emails and paperwork. But she found herself reading the same sentences over and over, comprehension eluding her restless brain. A tap on her cubicle wall made Jane flinch. She looked up to see Charles leaning over her partition, his face inquisitive. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said. "Just wanted to check in and see if you've had time to think about our discussion yesterday." Jane hesitated, buying herself time by taking a long sip from her coffee mug. She knew Charles would not be satisfied until he got a firm answer. Setting down her mug, Jane spoke slowly, choosing each word with care. "I'm truly grateful for the opportunity," she began, "and for you seeing such potential in me. She trailed off, dropping her gaze from Charles's attentive eyes as she gathered her nerve. Looking back up, she continued, "As I've thought through this decision, however, I realized something. While I know I would succeed as manager, deep down I'm yearning for my work to feel more meaningful. At this point in my life, I believe pursuing a leadership role here would take me farther away from that goal." Jane held her breath as Charles furrowed his brow, seemingly turning over her words in his mind. She couldn't recall the time she had asserted her wishes so directly at work. After a pause that felt endless, Charles exhaled and his expression softened into a look of understanding. "If this promotion doesn't align with what will truly motivate you, then it would be foolish to accept it," he said. "I appreciate you taking time to consider this opportunity carefully and being honest with me." Relieved that Charles didn't seem upset, Jane thanked him again for considering her. As he retreated from her cubicle, an unexpected sensation of optimism washed over her. She had taken the first step toward carving out a life driven by her values and desires instead of just passively accepting each day as it came. For the first time in years, Jane felt a kernel of excitement about what lay ahead. The next few weeks passed in a blur as Jane rolled off more and more work to Charles to prepare for his fast-approaching retirement date. Co-workers often dropped by her desk now, shaking their heads in disbelief that anyone would turn down such a coveted promotion. But doubt did not creep its way back into Jane's mind even once. She knew with full conviction that she was making the right decision for herself. On Charles's final day, the department gathered to say farewell and raise a toast in his honor. As co-workers laughed and reminisced over cake, Jane noticed Charles beckoning her off to the side. "I know you'll do great things," he said, giving her shoulder an encouraging squeeze. "This is just the first step. Stay true to yourself, Jane, and the rest will follow." With that, he was off, leaving Jane feeling like she was standing on the precipice of a new life. The safety net of all things familiar was slipping away, but she was ready to meet whatever lay ahead. After one last glance around the office that had encompassed the past 5 years of her life, Jane grabbed her belongings and walked towards her future with a smile on her face. Chapter 4: A New World. Jane took a deep breath as she turned the key in the lock of her apartment door. The space already felt different somehow, even though nothing had physically changed yet. Dropping her bags by the entrance, she let out an enormous sigh of relief. She had done it, taken the immense step of leaving her stable job behind to pursue a new creative path. After greeting an enthusiastic frumpy at her feet, Jane brewed a fresh cup of coffee and sank into her warm but comfortable couch. As the initial euphoria of quitting began to fade, the practical implications of her decision came more sharply into focus. Pursuing freelance writing meant giving up a steady paycheck. She would have to drastically trim her expenses and budget carefully to get by on irregular income. Jane booted up her laptop to take stock of her financial standing and assess how long her savings could sustain her. The numbers were tight, but she could make it work for several months if she was frugal. She would also need to secure health insurance. Thankfully, she had no outstanding debts aside from a remaining balance on her student loan. Setting her finances temporarily aside, Jane opened a new Word document and stared at the blinking cursor, considering what to write first. She felt eager to make progress on the novel concept she had been mulling over for years. But an immediate onslaught of self-doubt clouded her motivation. Did she have any business thinking she could write a novel without formal training? And even if she managed to finish a draft through sheer willpower, the odds of getting it published seemed infinitesimal. Jane worried that gnawing sense of futility might become her constant companion in this new, unpredictable chapter. Shaking off the negative thoughts, Jane pulled out a notebook and started jotting down all her worries and insecurities. Just getting them out of her head and onto paper seemed to release some of their oppressive power. She reminded herself that of course this transition would be frightening. She was stepping into the complete unknown. But that was also the point. She had been dying for her life, to feel less predictable and stagnant. Jane turned back to her laptop with renewed resolve. Her fingers hovered over the keys as she summoned the opening lines of her story from some deep, vulnerable place within. Typing tentatively at first, and then, with growing confidence, Jane became engrossed in fleshing out the world and characters she had imagined so often over the years. The winter sun had begun to set by the time she finally came up for air. Reading back the pages she had written, Jane allowed a proud smile to emerge. This was nowhere near a polished or complete first chapter, but it was a start, one she finally had the freedom to pursue. Over the next several weeks, Jane settled into a routine split between writing in the mornings and querying magazines and websites with article pitches in the afternoons. Rejections still stung when they rolled in, but Jane was slowly growing accustomed to them as an inevitable part of this path. Late one night, as Jane sat editing her novel draft, she came across a pivotal conversation between two characters that suddenly struck her as forced and inauthentic. She ended up deleting the entire exchange in frustration. How could she think she could ever get an entire book published when she couldn't even construct realistic dialogue? Slamming her laptop closed, Jane admitted exhaustion was exaggerating her doubts. Reminding herself that writing an entire novel was not something she could master overnight lifted her spirits. She prepared for bed, proud of the hard work she had put in so far. Even on the hardest days, she did not miss her old office job one bit. Jane felt certain that together with determination, her passion would be enough to overcome whatever obstacles arose. Curled under the covers that night, Jane's mind swirled with anticipation about where this new path would lead her. The future felt malleable and brimming with potential once again. She had taken the immense leap into the unknown. Now it was up to her to make the most of it. As she drifted off to sleep, Jane felt content in the knowledge that whatever lay ahead, it would no longer be the safe but unsatisfying status quo she left behind. Chapter 5. External Obstacles. Jane jolted awake in the dark, momentarily confused about what had startled her. Then she heard the shrill ring of her phone on the nightstand. Fumbling to grab it, she saw an unfamiliar number displayed on the screen. Her pulse quickened. In her line of freelance writing work, late-night calls were never a good sign. "Hello?" Jane answered tentatively. The brash voice on the other end belonged to Ethan, an editor she had pitched articles to numerous times over the past months. He never responded to her pitches, leaving Jane to assume he simply wasn't interested in working with her. "Glad I caught you," Ethan said briskly. "I have an assignment that's perfect for you. It's time sensitive, so we need to move quick. When can you get me an initial draft?" Still disoriented, it took a moment for Jane to process his rapid-fire words. Ethan wanted to give her an assignment? She scrambled for a notebook and pen to jot down the details as he spoke. It was a short human interest piece for a regional magazine focused on inspiring stories of perseverance. Jane assured Ethan she would start on it immediately and get him a draft by the end of the week. As she hung up the phone, adrenaline coursed through Jane's veins. She had been hoping for this big break, but now that it was here, she couldn't afford any missteps. Failure would undo months of hard work establishing herself. Over the next few days, Jane became completely absorbed in interviewing sources and writing the article. She barely left her desk, much to Frumpy's dismay. The only breaks she took were to brew more coffee or walk frenzied laps around her apartment when she needed to dislodge writer's block. Late Thursday evening, bleary-eyed and exhausted, Jane typed the final sentence. After obsessively triple-checking for errors, she emailed the draft off to Ethan just before midnight, heart pounding as she hit send. She had poured everything into this piece. Now It was out of her hands. Jane knew she should try to get some sleep, but anxiety kept her wired. She tried fruitlessly reading a book to unwind before giving up. As she stared aimlessly at infomercials, doubts crept in. What if her draft wasn't good enough? What if Ethan had changed his mind about hiring her? The silence over the next few days was agony. A week after turning in the draft, Jane returned home after grocery shopping to find her phone flooded with missed calls and texts from Ethan. Hands shaking, she called him back right away. Ethan's irritated tone made her stomach sink. "Your draft is a mess," he said without preamble. "Rambling, no consistent narrative, arc. Did you even proofread this?" His complaints went on as each stingingly accurate criticism pierced Jane. "I don't have time to hold your hand," Ethan concluded briskly. "Get this on track, or we'll need to part ways." Before Jane could respond, he hung up. Crushed, Jane sat staring blankly at her discarded groceries. All her work and Ethan couldn't stand what she produced. She knew deep down her skills weren't refined enough yet for a professional magazine. Imposter syndrome flooded over Jane, tempting her to give up on writing entirely. She considered calling Ethan back to resign from the assignment, but hesitation held her back. If she walked away now, it would be a self-fulfilling prophecy about her inability to make it. With a surge of defiance, Jane resolved to take Ethan's feedback and improve the piece, proving her dedication. Over the next few weeks, Jane channeled all her frustration into overhaul rewrites. She dissected the plot, strengthened character arcs, and tightened the language. The night she resubmitted the draft, Jane felt a wary sense of confidence. She had risen to meet this challenge rather than shying away. As she finally crawled into bed, exhaustion quickly overtook her. What mattered was that she kept learning and improving. The rest she had no control over. Jane awoke the next morning to an email from Ethan. Holding her breath, she opened it and read his brief note. "Good save. Piece is polished now. I'll submit it for the next issue." Jane raised both fists in victory, whooping so loudly a disgruntled frumpy darted under the couch. She had cleared this first major hurdle. Her career was still newborn and fragile, but if she kept persevering through self-doubt, Jane knew each success would bolster her resilience. For today, the satisfaction of proving herself was reward enough. Chapter 6: Internal Obstacles. Jane leaned back from her desk, stretching her arms overhead and wincing as her cramped muscles unknotted. She had been hunched over her laptop for hours, desperately trying to make headway on the novel that had stalled. But no matter how she tried to rearrange paragraphs and dredge her mind for the right phrasing, the scenes felt flat and lifeless. Discouraged, she glanced at the time in the corner of the screen. It was past 9 p.m. already. No wonder her brain felt fried. Jane debated calling it a night, but an obsessive inner voice needled her to keep pushing. She had made the leap to writing full-time. She couldn't afford to be complacent. With a sigh, Jane turned back to the manuscript. Cursor still blinked accusingly on the same sentence she had been rereading for an eternity. She knew nothing more would get accomplished in this state. But the nagging compulsion to force more mediocre pages out gripped her. Just one more chapter, Jane muttered half-heartedly as she racked her mind for where the plot should go next. She had lost track of her overall vision. Frustration mounting, she allowed herself a brief fantasy of opening her laptop in the morning to find beautifully polished paragraphs had magically appeared overnight. Jane shook her head, annoyed by her own defeatist attitude. This was the life she had chosen because it aligned with her values. Some days the writing flowed easily, the hours passing in glorious oblivion. On the hard days, she had to keep faith that she would grow stronger for having weathered them. Still, though, doubts crept into Jane's tired mind. She thought of acquaintances from her old office job who were now buying houses, getting married, taking vacations. Meanwhile, she could barely scrape enough article assignments together to pay a month's rent. Imposter syndrome flooded over Jane, tempting her to abandon this tenuous writing career before she failed spectacularly. Jane's gaze landed on a handwritten note stuck to the corner of her laptop screen. Stay true to yourself. Charles's parting words of wisdom from her last day at the office. His vote of confidence had propelled her through the early unknown days of writing full-time. Rereading it now helped drain some of the self-doubt from Jane's mind. Looking at the time again, Jane resolved to call it a night. As she brushed her teeth before bed, she made an effort to replace her negative thinking with intention. Even if progress was slow, each small gain brought her closer to her goals. If she kept writing from her soul rather than external expectations, she had to trust her skills would continue developing. Jane settled into bed, relieved to give her weary mind some rest. As she drifted off, she focused on conjuring the passion that had pulled her down this path to begin with. Some days, that fire burned brightly, making her feel alive. On the hard days, she had to stoke the embers and just keep persisting. Fortified with renewed motivation, Jane slept peacefully. The obstacles were expected. What mattered was how she responded. Chapter 7, Dark Moment. Jane's eyes flew open into darkness, her sleep shattered by a crash from the living room. Heart pounding, she lay frozen in bed, straining to make sense of what she heard. Had she imagined it? No. Now she caught the unmistakable sound of a floorboard creaking under cautious footsteps. A tremor of fear ran through Jane's body. Someone was in her apartment. As silently as possible, Jane slid open her nightstand drawer and grabbed the pepper spray she kept there. She considered making a run for the front door, but the intruder was already roaming between her and the only exit. Going on the offensive was her only option. Jane moved stealthily down the hall towards the living room, pressing herself flat against the wall. She could see only the outline of a figure silhouetted against the windows. Taking a deep breath, she leapt out, aiming her pepper spray right at the shadowy intruder. "Damn it, Jane!" a familiar voice yelled as the figure recoiled from the spray. Flicking on the lights, Jane illuminated the pained face of her friend David. Shocked, she dropped her outstretched arms. "What the hell, David?" Jane shouted back through a surge of adrenaline. "Why didn't you call before coming over?" David grimaced, dabbing at his eyes with his sleeve. "Wanted to surprise you for your birthday tomorrow," he muttered, gesturing to a gift bag abandoned on the floor. Jane exhaled, her racing heart slowly calming. In the chaos, she had forgotten her birthday was coming up. Trust impulsive David to nearly give her a heart attack trying to surprise her. After profusely apologizing and getting David an ice pack for his eyes, Jane made them each a cup of tea to soothe their rattled nerves. They recounted the terrifying encounter, able to laugh about it now. Jane felt a rush of gratitude that she hadn't mistakenly pepper-sprayed an actual intruder willing to hurt her. Despite the traumatic start, spending the morning of her birthday with her oldest friend lifted Jane's spirits. She hadn't seen much of David lately, between his busy job and new girlfriend. Catching up reminded Jane of more carefree times, starting out in the city, when weekday misadventures were their norm. An envelope landed in Jane's lap, jolting her from reminiscing. "That's the real gift," David said. "The gift bag is just for laughs." Jane opened the card to find a generous birthday check inside. She started to protest, but he waved her off. "I know you've been struggling. Put it towards the novel or something fun." Impulsively, Jane threw her arms around David in a fierce hug. His support of her writing aspirations since college meant everything. She vowed to use part of the money taking him to dinner at the lavish Italian restaurant they could never afford as students. After David left, a melancholy settled over Jane. She surveyed her quiet, empty apartment, the only plans for her birthday, a video call with her mom later. Her isolation had intensified pursuing writing full-time. The long, solitary days left her craving connection and adventure. For the first time in a while, Jane felt the sharp pang of loneliness. Shaking off the funk, Jane grabbed the gift bag David left and pulled out outrageous sequined miniskirt. She had to laugh, imagining his misguided thought process, buying it. Trying on the eye-catching skirt, Jane had an impulse to get all dressed up and go immerse herself among people tonight. Stepping out of her apartment later, feeling glamorous and free, Jane took a deep breath of the crisp night air. She had weathered heavy doubts and setbacks to follow her passion. But sometimes, in the struggle, she forgot to enjoy the journey. Tonight called for celebrating herself and all she had survived. Linking arms with her glittering reflection in the subway window, Jane ventured off to find adventure. Chapter 8. Climax. Jane's heels clicked against the sidewalk as she hurried down the dimly lit street. The neighborhoods were growing unfamiliar in her aimless wandering to prolong the celebratory night. She should have turned back home already, but restless impulse pushed her on. Crossing to avoid a noisy group that had just spilled from a bar, Jane accidentally turned down an empty side street. The sound of raucous laughter faded abruptly into unsettling silence. Unease prickled the back of Jane's neck as she noticed the buildings here were abandoned, their windows dark. Picking up her pace, Jane rummaged in her purse for the can of mace attached to her keychain. Just as her hand closed around the cold metal cylinder, she heard slow footsteps echo behind her. Her chest tightened. Before she could react, a figure emerged from the shadows. "Hey, beautiful, where you rushing off to?" His leering words slurred together slightly. Jane's grip on the mace canister tightened as she backed away slowly. She took in the man's imposing size, his cold expression that held no indication of warmth or humanity. There would be no reasoning with him. When Jane made it obvious she wasn't going to respond, the man's mocking smile dropped into a look of rage. He lunged toward her, but stumbled over a broken chunk of pavement. Seizing the opportunity, Jane turned and fled down the sidewalk. The footsteps pounded after her again, closer this time. Jane spared a panicked glance back. The man was staggering, but pursued her relentlessly, primal instinct having taken over. Up ahead, Jane spotted a 24-hour laundromat, its fluorescent lights glowing like a beacon through the darkness. She flung herself through the propped-open door into the comforting hum of the empty laundromat. Collapsing onto a plastic chair, she struggled to catch her breath and stop shaking. Under the harsh lights, Jane stared down at the sequined skirt that had made her feel so free and alive earlier that night. Now the glittering fabric just mocked her, a symbol of what drew predatory eyes. Hot tears of anger, fear, and shame welled in her eyes. She ripped the stupid skirt off right there in the laundromat, suddenly unable to bear wearing it a second longer. Jane sat clutching the balled-up fabric in her fists, raw emotions crashing over her in waves. She thought about calling David or the police, but she just felt numb. All she wanted was to feel safe in her own bed. The subway platform was deserted when Jane emerged gratefully from the underground tunnels back in her neighborhood. She hurried down the final block, fatigue hitting her. Inside the familiar walls of home, Jane finally allowed herself to fully break down. She had just wanted one night of letting loose and adventure. Instead, that Navi desire had almost cost her. Jane's trembling anger was directed inward now. If she had just made smarter choices, been less reckless. A tiny voice broke through her self-blame. "It's not your fault." Jane tried to quiet that voice of compassion, but it persisted. She had done nothing to invite being attacked. The fault lay with the man who chose to prey on her weakness. Exhausted by the emotional roller coaster, Jane dragged herself to bed as the first light of dawn glowed outside. Despite her swirling thoughts, she quickly slipped into a dreamless sleep, her psyche too battered to face further processing yet. For now, she just needed rest. Chapter 9, Twist. Jane slowly surfaced to consciousness, clawing her way from the fog of deep exhaustion. Even cocooned in the warmth of her bed, she could sense something wasn't right. As full awareness hit, the memories of last night crashed over her, the giddy freedom spiraling into terror when she found herself preyed upon. Jane squeezed her eyes shut, willing it all to have been a nightmare. But the truth still waited when she opened them again. Peeling herself from the tangled sheets, Jane stood under a near scalding shower, as if she could wash away the stain of violation she felt. As much as she wanted to crawl back into the oblivion of sleep, she made herself follow the comforting routine of brewing coffee and making breakfast. The familiar tasks settled her nerves slightly. Jane had just forced down the last bites of her toast when an aggressive pounding on the front door made her jump. She approached cautiously, bracing for the worst. Looking through the peephole, she sagged in relief and annoyance. Only David would show up at her place this early, pounding like the police. As soon as she opened the door, David's concerned questions came rapid fire. Why'd you leave the club alone so late? What happened with that creep? In her frazzled state, Jane had completely forgotten texting David the night before about almost being attacked. Now here he was, in protective mode, ready to dispense brotherly outrage on her behalf. I'm okay, I promise, Jane assured, guiding him to sit on the couch before recounting the terrifying encounter in full. David listened intently, cursing under his breath, his knee bouncing anxiously. This city is full of messed up people, David said once she finished. You can't be wandering around alone at night. Jane bristled at the inadvertent condemnation in his tone. Believe me, I've learned that lesson, she said tightly. They sat in tense silence for a minute. Jane knew he was just worried for her, but she didn't want to lecture him. David ran a hand through his hair roughly. Sorry, Jane, I didn't mean to come off judgmental, he said with a sigh. I just wish I could have protected you from having to go through that. He leaned in suddenly and wrapped her in a hug. Jane exhaled, feeling her irritation dissipate. I know. Me too, she said softly. But it happened, and now we move forward. They sat together quietly for a while, taking comfort in each other's presence. Jane felt profoundly grateful to not be weathering this alone. Over the next week, Jane found herself jumpy, walking anywhere alone. She dutifully stuck to well-lit main roads. The fear slowly lessened its grip on her, but a new weariness remained. She was warier now, a little more withdrawn into herself. Sitting down one night to work on her novel draft, Jane found words flowing out about a character recovering from trauma, their sense of safety and trust in the world shattered. She wrote page after page, tension releasing through her fingertips. By the time she stumbled off to bed, she felt lighter. Dark times had fueled her art, but not defined her. On a calm Saturday, spent lazing in the park with David, Jane found the laughter and easy conversation returning. The lingering shadow cast by that night was slowly receding as life resumed its rhythm. She would always carry the scar of it, but refused to hand over power by living in fear. Peace restored in her world, Jane dove back into writing with renewed passion. She was reminded there was so much yet to learn about herself and life. Vulnerability came hand in hand with being alive. As she reached boldly for each new day's potential, the future unfurled brightly once again. Exhausted from her turbulent emotions, Jane crawls into bed early and quickly falls into a deep sleep. Hours later, she is jolted awake by the sound of pounding at her front door. Looking through the peephole, she sees two police officers standing in the hall. Jane opens the door hesitantly. Before she can speak, the officers identify her as Jane Smith and say they need to bring her to the station right away concerning the assault and suspected murder of a man last night. Jane is completely stunned, having no memory of committing such a horrible crime. She convinces the officers there must be some mistake, but they firmly place her under arrest and into a squad car. At the police station, Jane is interrogated by a detective who shows her security footage from last night that clearly depicts a woman appearing to be Jane following and attacking a man in the street. Jane insists it must be someone impersonating her, though even she starts to doubt herself. Chapter 10, Return Home. Jane paced the cramped jail cell, her mind racing. Less than 24 hours ago, police arrived at her door, accusing her of assault and murder. The security footage from that night unmistakably showed a woman identical to Jane stalking and attacking a man, but Jane had zero recollection of this horrific crime. During relentless questioning, Jane racked her brain, trying to recall any details about her actions that night. But everything after arriving home was a blank. Exhausted and overwhelmed, she had begun questioning her own sanity. The public defender assigned to Jane reviewed the damning evidence piling up. Jane needed to provide concrete proof that she was innocent if they had any hope of beating this. But no alibi or excuse came to mind. As Jane sat holding her head in her hands, a brief flash suddenly appeared the face of a young woman passing her on the street, an eerie mirror image. In a rush, Jane realized there was a doppelganger out there impersonating her. This evil twin must have committed the crime that she was now accused of. Jane urged her lawyer to obtain any surveillance footage from around the attack location that night. After days of desperate waiting, he arrived with a breakthrough security video showing Jane's lookalike trailing the victim. This irrefutable evidence corroborated the twin theory. At a pressured meeting with the prosecutor, Jane and her lawyer presented the footage proving two identical women existed. Though reluctant to admit fault, the prosecutor could not refute such hard evidence. Begrudgingly, all charges against Jane were dropped. Jane took her first breath as a free woman, utterly exhausted. She had narrowly avoided imprisonment for a heinous murder, but the mysterious doppelganger was still out there and newly aware that Jane posed a threat to her sinister plans. The end.
Halloween, a time of fun, fright, and festivity, but in Las Vegas, it holds a sinister secret. Drawing back the veil of joyous trick-or-treating and ghoulishly delightful costumes, we delve into the shadowy corners of Sin City's Halloween tradition. As the last day of October approaches, a chill not born of the autumn wind sweeps over the city. It is the chill of fear, the specter of a horrifying tradition that has haunted Las Vegas for years. In the heart of this neon desert, an ominous figure emerges from the shadows every Halloween night, known only as the Halloween Murderer. A specter more terrifying than any ghoul or goblin, this elusive figure has become a macabre legend, a ghost story whispered in hushed tones and nervous glances. Unseen yet ever present, the Halloween Murderer's reign of terror is as unpredictable as it is chilling. Each year, as the clock strikes midnight, marking the beginning of All Hallows' Eve, the city falls under the murderer's eerie influence. The streets, usually bustling with trick-or-treaters and partygoers, grow ominously quiet, the laughter and merriment replaced by a silence as heavy as a tombstone. The Halloween murderer's identity remains shrouded in mystery, their motives as murky as a witch's brew. Some say it's a vengeful spirit returned from the grave, others claim it's a human monster, feeding off the fear and chaos of the night. The stories vary, but the fear remains the same. Despite the countless investigations and endless speculation, the Halloween murderer continues to elude capture. The documented cases only add to the legend, a chilling testament to the true horror that can lurk beneath the surface of a city known for its lights and entertainment. As the sun sets on Halloween night, the city of Las Vegas holds its breath, fearing the return of the Halloween murderer. The anticipation is as palpable as the fear, a grim reminder that beneath the candy and costumes, Halloween can be a night of true terror. Enter our unsuspecting hero, a babysitter tasked with taking 2 children trick-or-treating. She is a bright-eyed college student, hailed as the best sitter in her neighborhood. Tonight, she's entrusted with the care of 2 siblings, an eager 7-year-old boy brimming with energy, dressed as a fearsome dinosaur, and his older sister, a 12-year-old who's chosen a witch's attire, her excitement barely concealed. They've been looking forward to this night for weeks. Halloween in Las Vegas, a night of magic, mischief, and endless candy. The plan is simple. Hit the most generous houses, collect as many sweets as they can carry, and stay together at all times. The air is tingling with anticipation as they step out into the cool October night, their laughter echoing through the dimly lit streets. Their innocent joy is infectious, a testament to the magic of Halloween. Little do they know their night of fun is about to take a terrifying turn. As the night progresses, a chilling feeling of being watched begins to creep upon our babysitter. The jovial atmosphere of Halloween, once filled with laughter and the rustling of candy wrappers, starts to turn sinister. The air becomes heavy, and every shadow seems to dance with malicious intent. The babysitter, a young woman of 20, is not new to the job, but tonight feels different. Her eyes, usually filled with warmth and kindness, are now sharp and alert, scanning the darkness for any signs of danger. There's an unsettling sensation prickling at the back of her neck, an instinctual alarm that she can't quite shake off. As they wander from house to house, she notices a flicker in her peripheral vision. A figure shrouded in darkness, seemingly appearing and disappearing at will. Is it a trick of the light, or is someone lurking in the shadows, watching their every move? She shakes off the thought, attributing it to the eerie ambience of the night. Yet the feeling of unease persists. The laughter of the children begins to sound distant, drowned out by the pounding of her heart. She hears whispers in the wind, footsteps that aren't theirs echoing off the pavement, and the rustling of leaves that isn't caused by the breeze. The Halloween decorations, once amusing, now seem to leer at her with menacing grins, as if they're in on a secret she's yet to uncover. Her protective instincts kick in. She holds the children closer, her eyes never leaving the dancing shadows. The festive joy of Halloween has been replaced by a bone-chilling dread. She realizes that this is no ordinary night. The tales of the Halloween murderer, once thought of as mere stories to frighten the gullible, suddenly seem all too real. In the face of this unseen threat, she steels herself. She was no longer just a babysitter. She was a protector, a guardian against the unseen terror lurking in the shadows. The game of trick or treat had turned into a game of survival, a game they had to win. With her heart pounding and her senses on high alert, our babysitter decides to confront the lurking terror. She knows that running away is not an option, not when the lives of the 2 innocent children are at stake. She is their guardian for the night, their only line of defense against the faceless menace that has been haunting their Halloween. She takes a deep breath, steadying herself. She feels the weight of the responsibility on her shoulders, the gravity of the situation pressing down on her. But there's a spark of determination in her eyes, a fire in her heart. She's not just a babysitter, she's a protector, a warrior, and she's ready to fight. The crisp autumn air prickles her skin as she steps outside, the children safely tucked away inside the house. She's alone now, vulnerable yet defiant. The streets of Las Vegas, usually buzzing with life, now lay eerily silent. the glow of the jack-o'-lanterns casting long dancing shadows that seem to whisper of the danger lurking just out of sight. Every rustle of the leaves, every creak of a door, every whisper of the wind sends a jolt of adrenaline coursing through her veins. She knows he's out there, somewhere in the darkness, watching, waiting, but she refuses to let fear consume her. She stands tall, her resolve unshaken. She calls out into the night, her voice echoing through the stillness. She challenges the stalker, dares him to come out of the shadows. She's ready for him, ready to protect the children at all costs. As she waits for his response, she feels a chill run down her spine. This is it, the moment of truth, the confrontation she's been bracing herself for. She can hear the distant hooting of an owl, the soft rustling of the wind through the trees, and then silence. In the chilling silence of the night, she stood her ground, ready to face the Halloween murderer. The moment of truth had arrived. It was a battle of wits and courage, a fight to the finish. As Halloween night descended over Las Vegas, a chilling showdown was set to unfold. Our brave babysitter, her heart pounding like a drum, stood her ground against the infamous Halloween murderer. The air was thick with suspense. Each second ticking by felt like an eternity. The echoes of distant trick-or-treaters were drowned out by the unnerving silence of the standoff. The murderer, shrouded in the shadows, bore an eerie grin, a grim spectacle of Halloween's darkest side. Yet, the babysitter, fueled by a resolve to protect the children, her fear transformed into steely determination. In her eyes, a spark of defiance flickered, outshining the darkness of the night. The deadly dance began, a macabre waltz on this night of frights. The babysitter, using her wit and resourcefulness, outmaneuvered the murderer's every move. She was not just a protector of the innocent tonight, but a beacon of courage against the embodiment of Halloween horror. Every turn, every feint, every step was a testament to her bravery. Cornered, the murderer lunged, but the babysitter was quicker, smarter. She trapped him, using his own momentum against him. The Halloween murderer, the terror of Las Vegas, was finally outwitted, outplayed. With the arrival of the police, the city's nightmare was over. The Halloween murderer, a spectre that had haunted the city for years, was no more. The babysitter, a hero in the truest sense, had saved not just the children, but the spirit of Halloween itself. In the end, bravery and determination prevailed. The Halloween night was reclaimed, and the city of Las Vegas breathed a sigh of relief.